Yeah, hi folks. Now today I'm going to cover Mihingarangi Forbes' Trickle Treaty propaganda documentary, or at least snippets of it. But first, from now on in 2024, I'm going to be posting links to the Stop Co-Governance Truth Tour in the description below, as it's vitally important we all learn as much about the treaty as we can, as there's probably going to be a referendum on it at some point, so we really need to be informed. Anyway, now to Forbes' propaganda.
Well, the ballot papers have been counted and the results are in.
The referendum for the voice to Parliament has been defeated.
It is an overwhelming no.
The referendum will not pass.
Tonight's result is not one that I had hoped for.
It was the vote that shocked the Indigenous people of Australia.
You know, I don't know what's next, but it's just devastating.
Their fellow countrymen decisively rejecting a proposal to recognise them in the Constitution.
It was a rejection. It was wrong. It was unfair.
So democracy's unfair then. And by the way, how Indigenous is this guy? Yeah, now this is Thomas Mayo and his wife Melanie. Very Indigenous, aren't they? Mayo's father is from the Torres Strait Islands. His great-great-grandfather arrived in the Torres Strait from the Philippines and married a local woman. His grandparents on his mother's side are English, Irish and Polish. Yes, we have another grifter, folks.
And the same may happen here.
They have invented a principle of the treaty that it's about a partnership between races.
With race relations in Aotearoa being... Should the Australian Constitution be altered to recognise the First Peoples of Australia through a voice to Parliament? Initially, support for the voice to Parliament was strong.
The sorrow and soul-searching is underway in the Yes camp.
Instead, the majority of Australians voted against it.
This campaign...
Yes, and that's because it was sold as a one-page lie.
But first, yesterday in Parliament and again today, the Prime Minister insisted that the ULU Statement from the Heart is an uplifting one-page document, inviting all Australians to go on a journey of reconciliation together. Yesterday, he even labelled statements that it's actually 26 pages as a conspiracy theory, he said, worthy of QAnon.
It is something that has been out there, like a whole lot of the QAnon theories. We have all sorts of conspiracy stuff out there, but this is a ripper. That is the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
And so my staff got a phone call at 12:54 this afternoon with a verbal clarification that the document is in fact the 26 pages and not just, of course, the one page.
The full Uluru Statement, Voice, Treaty, Truth, well, that matters because while people might support the voice at first blush, when they understand it means treaty and truth, well, that's when voter support drops off. And in recent weeks, you know, it's dropped off a cliff to the point that now more than 50% of Australians say they're going to vote no because they reject the push in the full Uluru Statement for multi-billion-dollar reparations on top of the near $40 billion a year currently spent on Aboriginal people, and they reject too the rewriting of our history as a story of shame. Let's be clear, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is not the one-page sanitised summary that the Prime Minister says it is. It's everything that the Indigenous activists think they need to make amends for 240 years of injustice flowing from what they regard as the illegal invasion of Australia. Here's Professor Megan Davis, one of the Uluru Statement's authors, denying the Prime Minister's claim that it's just one page in her 2018 Parkes oration.
A very powerful part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is that it isn't just the first, one-page statement. It's actually a very lengthy document of about 18 to 20 pages.
Last year, Professor Davies wrote in the Australian newspaper that, and I quote, "The Uluru Statement is occasionally mistaken," she said, occasionally mistaken, as merely a one-page document. In totality, it's closer to 18 pages and includes a lengthy narrative called Our Story. She said this too during a webinar for the Australian Institute in August last year.
And it's actually 18 pages, the Uluru Statement. People only read the first.
She said this too at the recent Sydney Peace Prize Award ceremony.
It's very important for Australians to read the statement. And the statement is also much bigger. It's actually 18 pages.
So let's examine why voters' understanding of the full statement from the heart and what it might mean if the voice gets up is such a concern for the Albanese government. Now, after page 1, the Uluru Statement, as quoted in the Referendum Council's official report and as published under Freedom of Information by the National Indigenous Australians Agency, includes these statements. Quote, "The invasion that started at Botany Bay is the origin of the fundamental grievance between the old and new Australians." It goes on and says, "This is the time of the frontier wars, when massacres, disease and poison decimated first Australians. The Tasmanian genocide and the Black War waged by the colonials reveals the truth about this evil time. The taking of our land," it says, "without consent represents our fundamental grievance against the Crown." Now, this is all from the full Uluru Statement that the PM has said no fewer than 34 times that he supports in full, that Labor will implement in full. But there's more. The full Uluru Statement declares, and I quote, "Makarrata," it says, is another word for treaty. It is the culmination of our agenda. Now, this is the treaty that the PM insists has nothing to do with the voice. Yet as the full Uluru Statement declares, and I quote, "Any voice to the Parliament should be designed so that it could support and promote a treaty-making process." Quote again, it says, "Treaty would be the vehicle to achieve self-determination, autonomy and self-government." It goes on and says, "The true history of colonisation must be told. The genocides, the massacres, the wars and the ongoing injustices and discrimination." Now, all of this is in the 26-page document released under FOI by the Indigenous Agency. They note it as document 14 and it's titled Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Come on, Australia.
And no one saw it coming.
Vote no to the voice of division.
They were everywhere all of a sudden, everywhere, on every television station, on the news, and the social media was flooded with pictures of them. And they had several the key one was that the voice will divide us by race.
Yeah, and it would have, except Australians learnt from the separatist policies in New Zealand.
And now that's very interesting because literally that's what they did.
Now we have a choice to make. Do we give in to guilt and division, or do we say no?
So what that did was to introduce racist discourse.
Yeah, but it's somehow okay for racist people like you to divide people by race.
And that was their thing, they said over and over, number one. And that unleashed, as well as all of these untraceable bots on social media, with this very racist imagery, that basically created a license for people to express overtly racist sentiment and attack Indigenous people, and particularly anyone associated with the campaign.
Were you targeted by the No campaign?
You know, I was certainly one of the top targets of the No campaign. I think they used the angry black man trope, but it showed me basically dancing for money, with rack.
Yeah, now does he remind you of the grifters in New Zealand?
I worry for you guys in New Zealand.
Having been through what I've been through, it's going to be a tough fight for you.
And that fight has now arrived on the streets of Aotearoa. This month, thousands protested moves against the status of the treaty.
If they had a coherent message, that'd be great. But they're trying to say that a government who stands for treating all people the same is racist.
ACT campaigned for a referendum on the treaty and a treaty principles bill. While the referendum didn't get across the line in the coalition negotiations, the government has agreed to support the bill through to Select Committee. If it were to be successful, it could prompt a referendum. And a citizens-initiated referendum may still be on the cards.
Well, the reality is that what Mr Seymour's asked for, he's got. And whether that happens will depend on the wisdom of the submissions to the Select Committee and what new information that Parliament accepts to be true to take it forward in the way Mr Seymour needs.
Treaty expert and lawyer Moana Tufare.
I think if we're in a position as a society where the voting public in general had a very good understanding of the principles of the treaty.
You mean the fake principles? Now, I came across a link to the following great article about the treaty principles at the bottom of page 27 of the Psychology of Takeover booklet under Strategy 6, Lying and Deceitfulness. Now, this is Elizabeth Rata, who is a professor of education at the University of Auckland, which really amazes me. Elizabeth Rata, two treaties of Waitangi, the Articles Treaty and the Principles Treaty. There are two versions of the Treaty of Waitangi. The first is the 1840 Treaty, the Articles Treaty. The second is what I call the Principles Treaty. It dates from 1986, when the principles were first included in legislation. Astonishingly, the parliamentary representatives who inserted the word principles did not know what they meant. To include a word estranged from its meaning into legislation is an egregious political failure. At the very least, a democracy requires words to have an agreed meaning. Otherwise, rational communication is impossible. Autocracies that use ideologies to control how people think can dispense with accurate meaning. Democracies cannot. Now, just read this interesting bit. The meaning of the 1840 Treaty exists in the Articles. Article 1 recognised British sovereignty. Article 2 recognised the rights of Maori to hold or dispose of property. Article 3 recognised Maori as British subjects. In stark contrast, the inventors of the Principles Treaty have, after decades of uncertainty, finally settled on the so-called core principles of partnership, active protection and redress, despite these words not appearing in the Articles. The word principles first appeared in the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act. In that legislation, principles referred directly to the meaning, value and purpose of the Articles. The word principles was tied to the Articles. It had no referent outside those Articles. It did not state the word partnership, nor was active protection and redress mentioned or implied. It's all made up, folks. Three events detach the word principles from the treaty articles, leading to decades of meaning creation. They are the 1985 Treaty of Amendment Act, the 1987 Court of Appeals, akin to partnership statement, and the insertion of undefined principles into legislation from 1986. It's all a big con, folks.
and the way in which the treaty relationship was intended when it was first agreed, and the context in which we find ourselves, grappling with issues like co-governance or any other, relevant kind of treaty-related topic, then, okay, let's put the question to everybody, but we're not there. I think it's a really intellectually dishonest way of approaching what is actually quite a nuanced and contextual question.
What are your thoughts on the way, a potential treaty referendum is being handled?
A referendum is a yes or no vote to a very defined and specific question. It is not a debate. And yes, if we want to have a healthy debate, which I absolutely support, let's do that. But let's not leave it up to the largely uninformed voting public to make a largely uninformed decision.
Wow, how dare the public decide? Let's keep it behind closed doors and keep the grift going. Yeah, anyway, Happy New Year, folks. It's certainly going to be an interesting one with Winston, David and Julian Batchelor out there. But let's not forget our bleeding heart Liberals who are probably crying and sucking their thumbs right now. Anyway, folks, I've posted all the links below.